Hello and welcome to the Financial Planner Life podcast. I'm Sam Oakes, and today I've got James Woodfall on the podcast. He's an ex-financial planner. He ran his own business for over a decade. He's now working in emotional intelligence. And today we dig deep around emotional intelligence, put it up against IQ, and exactly what is emotional intelligence, how this can impact the recruitment and the training of staff within a financial planning business and affect the bottom line. This is a fantastic episode, future thinking, different thought process outside of the box about how you can improve your journey within your financial planning career, not just for you, but for your staff as well, if you're a business owner. I hope you enjoy it. James, thank you so much for joining me today on the Financial Planner Life podcast. How are you?
Good. Yeah, it's great to be invited on. Thanks.
Are you feeling emotionally intelligent today?
Yeah. Prior to us talking, I did my body scan. I did sort of 10 minutes of mindfulness. Thinking about, am I in the right state for this conversation? So yeah, I'm feeling top form. So we'll have
I used to do that a lot, actually. Yeah, I used to do that a lot. I used to have my little sound bowl, actually. I don't know where it is now. I think it's down. Now I've moved my office into my house, but I did a little sound bowl, and I used to come in, sit at my podcast, ready to do a podcast, and get my sound bowl out and do that, and then meditate for 10 minutes. And I did find it actually put me into a really relaxed state of mind and allowed me to be ready to be open as well. It allowed me to be open and not in my head thinking, what should I say? What should I do? It was more about, okay, you can remain open and let the conversation flow. So I think the whole getting yourself into a good headspace, meditation and the body scan works really, really well when it comes to the mindfulness, something I've practiced quite a lot over the years, actually. Do you meditate?
Yeah. So I use an app called Waking Up. So
Okay.
it's by a neuroscientist who studied meditation for, 20, 30 years. It's really, really good. And the thing I like about it is there's a daily meditation on there. So you can do 10 minutes, or you can do a bit longer than that. And they just expand it with silence, which is good. But there's about, when you sign up for it, there's a 30-day. It's basically like a 30-day course of how to meditate properly. So over that 30 days, you do it every single day, and they teach you various different techniques about how to do it. So some of it is you sit with your eyes closed. Some of it is you sit with your eyes open. Look at sort of wide visual field, and that's quite interesting. The thing I really like about it is it's got like all these little sort of podcast type sort of bits of content in there. So people who talk about emotions. So they'll get, say, some people who study emotions academically, they'll come on and they'll talk about emotions. You get people, they've had Matt Walker on, Why We Sleep. So they've had people talking about procrastination, productivity. It's a real good resource that you get. And I think the first 30 days I think it's probably free, but then you can sign up for, I think, a subscription, or I think there's a lifetime membership. I think that's why I did. It's about £300 or £400, and it's just brilliant value. And I think it's I highly recommend that one.
That's fantastic. What was the name again?
Waking Up.
Waking Up. I'm going to get that one.
Yeah, it's really good.
I want to get back into it.
The thing I liked about it with the style of meditation as well is I tried like Headspace and the Calm app, and it's just a small thing, but with this one, it's guided meditation, but there's no music in the background. So, you get that sort of ethereal, with some of them where it's like, I find that really off-putting. So the guy who does the guided meditations on this, he'll drop it and he'll say, right, if you're trying too hard, to meditate, just stop, just be aware that this is it. This is consciousness. Just sit in the space and just chill out. And then he'll be quiet for 2 minutes, and I really like that. And I like that he's a neuroscientist. So I like that there's actually, you've got this kind of highly ancient tradition, but they're also sort of combining it with, well, actually, there's now quite a lot of study going on into looking at how meditation and mindfulness affects the brain. So, and that's my gig. That's my brand, because I'm fascinated by that.
That's really cool, and that's why you're here today. We're going to talk about that. I love Andrew Huberman and the Huberman Lab as well, being a neuroscientist, and it's where I first heard about neuroplasticity. You know, the ability for us to actually change our brains and the way that we think with new neurological pathways. And when people say like a leopard never changes its spots, it's like we actually can change. And I think that's going to be topic of conversation today with you, isn't it? We're going to talk about that. Let's just kick things off first of all to give some people on this podcast a bit of context, that you know what you're talking about, and that you have experience of working within the financial planning profession. So just give us a little bit of an overview of your history up to today's date.
Yeah, sure. So I spent 15 years as a financial advisor, financial planner. So I was 21, 22, I think, when I started at Barclays. So they used to have a financial advisor academy, which is Barclays Financial Planning back in the day. So I did that for a couple of years, and then there was I think a day they put everyone in office and said, right, you're all redundant, go home. So that was quite interesting, early start in the career. And then I went and worked for HSBC as an employee advisor, and did that for 4 years, and then set up my own business under St James's Place Partnership 10 years ago, last month actually. And I ran that business for nearly 9 years, and it was a great business. You know, we had good numbers of clients, good funds under management. I had good back office team, paraplanners, support staff, 2 advisors in the business, and it was all going well. And we were doing really, really good work, utilizing cash flow modeling tools, doing financial planning. Like a few years before I exited, we effectively looked at doing sort of fee only financial planning that wasn't related to products. So we had a service where we would take clients through and just build a financial plan for them, write them a decent report, and they could go away and implement themselves if they wanted to. So it was great, and I think I was really into actually looking at how do I become a better financial planner. So I went through kind of a process of doing a coaching diploma. So I did an executive coaching diploma about 5 years ago, and then I got interested in. So one of the things that happened when I did the coaching diploma was they talked about different levels of listening. So like it's active listening, and this comes from coactive coaching. But they were talking about sort of there's 3 levels of listening, and the third level was like read the room. And I kind of came away from that thinking, how do you read a room? Is that there's no real instructions with it. And I came across a master's program, which was, I think, in communication, behavior, and credibility analysis, run through a partnership with a company called the Emotion Intelligence Academy, who I do a lot of work with now, and the Manchester University. So effectively, I did that 4 years ago, so graduated 2 years ago, and throughout that program it was a deep dive into looking at communication, behavior analysis, emotion intelligence, a bit of investigative interviewing, criminology, but really I was trying to sort of uncover, look, how can I become a better advisor? How can I understand and read clients' behavior so that I can communicate the work I could do with them and the value that brings in a far more compelling way. So it was good. But then I think the 2 years ago, what happened was I had some health issues, and I basically went in for like a really decent MOT, like a full body MRI, good set, a bit of bloods just to check I was in good shape. And I went into that thinking actually I was going to come out, clean bill of health, nothing wrong with you, off you go. But I came out with this report that basically said you need to go and see a neurosurgeon. I was like, okay, well that's interesting news. And I went and saw this guy, and he said, look, you've got 2 aneurysms in your brain, and if we don't sort them out at some point in your life, they could burst and kill you. So I was like, okay, I sit back in the chair. I was like, what the hell do I do with that information? So the main decision was that I had to exit the business. My daughter was due to be born the end of that year, and it just made sense I didn't want to risk, going into major surgery and thinking, well, is the business going to be there when I come back? So I had to wind it down, pass the clients over to some colleagues, to service, and that was that. So I effectively had last year off, in and out of hospital, and was thinking about, well, what do I do next? And while I was doing the master's program, in the second year, you do a dissertation. So you're marked on a dissertation effectively. And my dissertation was in looking at the relationship between emotional intelligence and job performance in financial planners. And as I was going through that, looking at what the research literature says about that, and doing my own research and study with a cohort of financial planners, I found that there was a link between emotional intelligence scores and sales performance, and client retention and number of client referrals that advisors are getting. And I just thought, well, that's really, really interesting, because one of the other things that the literature said about emotional intelligence is that it's a skill and ability that you can teach. So just purely by deductive reasoning, I thought, well, if you can teach it, then you've got a platform for training people that should lead to improvements in job performance. So I thought that was really interesting. And last year, I just thought, well, what am I going to do next if it's not going back into financial planning? And I just thought, well, that. And here we are.
That's an interesting story. I'm going to go back to that day that you were told that you had 2 aneurysms, right? And you went in for that MOT. I think a lot of us often think, I really want to go for an MOT, health check. But there's also this part of you that thinks, I don't want to find out if there's anything wrong with me. Now, your experience of that and going through it, and what would your advice be? Would it be go and have an MOT for your health check because you never know? Or, going through the process yourself and going through that scary situation, right, is bloody scary by the sounds of it. What advice would you have for somebody who's thinking about going for a health check MOT?
So it's interesting. I learned a huge amount about aneurysms, because it's quite interesting when you go and see the surgeon. They effectively said, well, there's different types of surgery we can do, but you've got to make the decision. And I don't know whether it's just a symptom of the fact that we live in a world that's quite litigious. So they effectively want you to make the call about what you do. But it means that I had to do a huge amount of my own research. And one of the things that I found, especially with aneurysms, is that the NHS routinely don't scan for them, because something like 5 in 100 will have them, and most are totally benign and are so small that they'll never cause any issue, with or rupture risk. But I think this is kind of the point you're getting to, is that the anxiety that comes with knowing is, some people can't cope with. And so that is, if you're going for an MOT, do you could find something which is totally benign, but that might just get in your head and you just think, hang on a minute, it's always in the back of your mind. But I would say the reason I did it was because I got quite into this, the idea of preventative health, and actually make it. And the decisions that you make today about things like diet, exercise, mindfulness, cutting out alcohol, sleeping well, and they're all really, really important for longevity. And I thought, well, actually, full body scans and getting a good set of diagnostics to kind of look at what's going on was kind of included within that kind of reading and things I was interested in. So I wouldn't say don't do it. I would say do it, but be prepared that if there is something that you've got to be mindful about how you're going to deal with that.
And it changed your life, and it changed your direction of your life as well. It's led you down the pathway of now doing something completely different. So sometimes the world and the universe presents some interesting learnings that send you off on a different pathway, and now send you down the route of being an emotional intelligence expert. Now, I think everybody's heard the term emotional intelligence at some point, but I wonder how many people actually truly can describe what emotional intelligence actually is. So for the good of me, who does use it on a regular basis, and probably a lot of our listeners, can you just describe and explain what emotional intelligence actually is.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I think there's lots of definitions out there. It's a concept that's been around for over 30 years now. So I think it started being developed in the 80s, and there's still now no universal agreement within the academic community about what it is. But there was a recent definition by my colleague Cliff Lansley, the Emotional Intelligence Academy, from 2020, and he went out and got agreement, I think 75% plus agreement from scientists who study emotions and emotional intelligence, that this is a good definition. So he basically defined it as an ability, and that's important. It's an ability. So rather than it being a trait, like say a personality trait, which is you're either extroverted or you're introverted, and that's how you are. It's an ability, which means that with training, with education, with coaching, you can develop it. So it's an ability to perceive, and that basically means reading and understanding others, reading and understanding others' behavior and how emotions affect their behavior. Understanding that, which is hypothesizing and being able to interpret, what's behind those behaviors, and influencing, so our own and others. So we don't just apply emotional intelligence to our interactions with others, we also apply it to ourselves. So part of that, looping back to mindfulness, what mindfulness really does for you is it increases, I think, your perception of what's going on in your own body. So you recognize, I think, emotions in yourself through mindfulness practice, and you get better at that. So understanding and influencing our own or others' emotions across a range of different contexts, because it's not just professional, it can be personal. And the kind of outcome here is that it guides our thinking and actions to help us, and others achieve their goals. So you can break emotional intelligence down a bit further and just say, well, it's made up of 4 quadrants, effectively. So if you there's 2 kind of, call that sort of meta, which is self and other. Break self down into self-awareness, which is understanding emotions in yourself, and self-management, which is tools and strategies for how you manage emotions in yourself. So, for example, it could be, that you learn how to, recognize when you're becoming, fearful about something. And maybe you can introduce a strategy like cognitive appraisal, for example, where you kind of appraise the situation and just think, well, what is it that's causing me to be afraid? And is that a rational, logical response? Or is it an emotional response? And actually, is it the right response for the situation? So that is kind of the self-management sort of element of some of these abilities. And it's like with anger, trigger for anger is, I think, barrier in the way of a goal. So you use that kind of analogy of when someone cuts you up in traffic, you're on the horn, you're out the window swearing, and really that reaction of you doing that is kind of that. Use that metaphor of the chimp. So if you read that
Yeah.
chimp paradox by Stephen Peters, but that's the chimp reacting, before the human. And usually what happens is you calm down, and you just think, I probably shouldn't have done that. So sometimes that self-management is just recognizing emotion as it arises, maybe putting the brakes on it and just saying, well, actually, it's not appropriate for me to kind of let anger out the bag in this situation. But in others, it might be. In some contexts, it is. If you're in the street, with your family, someone comes up, starts harassing you, clenching your fists and, going, maybe telling them to back off, showing them that you're, that actually you're a threat to them, or ready to be a threat to them. That's appropriate, the right situation. So you're utilizing emotions intelligently, and really that's one element in terms of self. Other is then, once you can do it with yourself and you can recognize, understand, and influence yourself, what then happens is your level of understanding and empathy for others goes through the roof. Because then what you can do is you can start to identify emotional behaviors in other, and in other people, and then you can start hypothesizing about what's behind that, and then you can apply influence, to guide people towards the right outcomes. And this is really important, I think, in financial planning contexts, because ultimately, what do financial planners do day in, day out as part of the discussions that they have with clients? and it's deal with emotion. And emotion, you can't separate emotion from the job role.
Mm.
You know, whether it's emotion in finance, about the emotions that affect decisions around risk, but more often than not, it's actually the emotions that just come with dealing with life. You know, dealing with a client who's grieving, you know, dealing with a client who's dealing with the stress of moving home, dealing with, you know, the kind of, you know, big changes in life, you know, selling a business, starting a business, all of that, you know, involves emotion. And advisors' ability to perform is intrinsically linked to their ability to get clients to trust them. And the way that they do that is by being by paying careful attention to clients' emotions, empathizing, and showing that they understand. And when they do that, trust grows. And when they don't pick up on those cues, it's not good for relationships.
Very interesting. I've gone on this journey in my life, and I think one of the most amazing tools I've ever learned is the ability to self-reflect. And when I'm able to self-reflect, I'm able to be aware of what part of self is being affected.
Yeah.
I can identify when part of self is being affected. It might be my security instincts or my sex instincts or my social instincts or my ego. And when I started to work out when in specific scenarios that part of self was being affected, I was then able to observe how I reacted in those situations. And what was interesting to me was my emotional regulation was often almost childlike. It was very childlike in some scenarios, how I reacted to situations. There was no regulation. I couldn't see. All I could feel was my emotion. I couldn't distinguish between fact, fiction, emotion. It was just, I was in the emotion. And this happened to me when I went through a 12-step process with AA 5 years ago. And they have this thing called step 4, where you've got to write down all your resentments and write down all your fears. And you've got to look at what part of self is being affected. And then you look at it and you review it. And then you then get the mirror out and think, well, what part did I play in that? How did I what it could be a harm, it could be a fear, it could be a resentment. So you take a little look at the part that you played in it, first of all, to distinguish whether or not you could have done things differently or reacted a different way. And then there's like a section about harm. So if you cause somebody some harm, maybe through your own actions or through a fear or through a resentment or through a belief that was wrong, and actually it was down to me, then I owed an apology to that person. So it's a really interesting concept. And I suppose it's down in cognitive behavioral therapy is essentially what it is. And when they first brought it out with AA, it wasn't that. CBT came out a lot later on. So it was quite interesting to see it when they produced this kind of structure, how ahead of CBT it actually was. But technically it was like cognitive behavioral therapy. So when I started looking at like CBT, and then you can kind of look at all the different cognitive distortions that come up and the scenarios, like I can't think of them now, but when you're compare and despair, for instance, these things will come up, and then how that makes you react. But actually, when you categorize all these different thoughts and these things that trigger these emotions, there's only a few of them. So you can start to categorize these feelings that are coming into your head, these emotions, into these like smaller amount of categories. It's not that complicated. And then when you can do that and you can instantly put it into a category, you can then put that thought on trial. And then when it's on trial, you can decide whether or not, judge and jury, it's true or not. Is it false evidence appearing real? And when I started learning that process and I did it on myself, it took time and energy to work it out. But then it took me out of self and then allowed me to then see things from other people's perspective. And I could then put myself in the other person's shoes, is where I then started to build empathy and understanding for others, more so than I ever had done. And also, I always had empathy. But again, if you don't know how to categorize it within yourself, how can you help? How can you categorize it within somebody else? How can you approach somebody in a way that would manage the emotion that they're going through or the feelings that they're going through, without experiencing it upon yourself? Like, know thyself first before I can help somebody else. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And I think empathy is there's different levels of empathy. There's There's, I mean, there's one interesting model which I came across, which is a neuroscience model, which effectively looks at the development of empathy in children and said, well, I think everyone's born with this sort of ability to, to empathize with others. And there's a development path, I think, up to about 4 years old, where children will say, if you put a bunch of children in a room, 2 or 3-year-olds, one of them starts crying, the rest of them will start crying. And maybe the first one started crying because someone took a toy away, but the rest of them start crying because they pick up on the other's emotional state and they share it. So it's like this. It's like a mirroring effect. And then past a certain age, they effectively realise that actually that feeling state isn't the trigger for it wasn't theirs. So I think we've all got this kind of inborn ability to kind of empathize, and there's individual differences between how people empathize as well. But we have this kind of different levels of empathy, sort of cognitive empathy, which is I kind of understand how you're feeling, and then there's this sort of shared empathy, which is actually I feel it too, and we can do that as adults. So we kind of retain that ability to kind of share state with others. But I agree. I think there is kind of an element of you have to be a bit careful with your language. And I think there is that very dangerous statement of someone comes to you with something really serious and you go, I know exactly how you feel.
Mm.
And well, I don't know if you've ever had that, but you kind of go, no, you don't. So you have to be a bit careful, with how you show empathy. But I think language and empathy is really, really important. But I think if you can throw away, I know exactly how you feel from your.
Interesting on that point then, because I think that happens a lot, and I think it's a natural way we want to show that we understand, but actually it can make the other person feel uncomfortable. So could it be something like, that sounds awful? How did that how did that feel to you? Like, is it more about then asking them a question and pushing it back on them to get them to tell you how they felt, but you've acknowledged that it must have been uncomfortable for them, and then you're asking them for their experience of that uncomfortable situation?
Yeah, so I think there are different ways of responding, and I think some people, and especially advisors, they kind of naturally gravitate towards asking a question for further understanding. And maybe that comes from fact finding or just thinking, well, what part of my job is to understand the client and ask questions. But if your first response is asking a question, which is what's called a searching response, you're actually dismissing someone's emotions. So really, whose agenda is it? And it's if you're asking a question in response to someone telling you a story about something that's difficult to them, really that's sort of dismissing their emotion for your benefit because you're just interested in finding out more information. And you might think, well, I'm doing it with good reason, and that's because my question might help the other person think and understand. And fair enough. But actually, you're better off acknowledging the emotion before you ask that additional searching question. So if someone says, look, I've got this scenario, yeah, absolutely, your first response, is far safer being, that must have been really difficult for you. Because you're acknowledging it. You're acknowledging the emotion. There's no agenda there. You're effectively, because you might not have to say anything else after that. The person you might just sit in silence, and the person might go, actually, yeah, and they might say something else. But it's called holding space. So rather than dismissing it.
So let's just make a distinction very quickly between EQ and IQ. What would you consider to be the main differences, and why, in your opinion, is one better to focus on than the other?
Well, I think EQ does have its does have some of its origins in IQ. So IQ's been around for over 100 years, and it's pretty rock solid in terms of the kind of volume of research that's out over the last 100 years. But again, there's still even after 100 years, not total agreement in the academic space about what IQ is. But there's one theory which says, well, look, you can break it down, and I think this is quite good as a kind of a understanding what IQ is. You can break it down into fluid intelligence, which if you like those verbal numerical reasoning tests, that you do, they throw sort of novel problems at you, and it's timed, and it's how many you get right within a certain time. That's pretty much what fluid intelligence is. It's your ability to solve novel problems at speed. And that declines as you age. And I'd say I've learned a lot about this because I'm doing a master's in psychology at the moment. I'm just about to go to my second year in a couple of months. Keep learning. Yeah. So fluid intelligence declines. Crystallized intelligence is the other aspect of IQ, and you could call that knowledge and experience. So that increases across a lifetime. And I remember when I was at St James's Place, chartered advisors, I think, probably earned about 30% more than non-chartered on average. So knowledge and experience, we call that crystallized intelligence, that increases across your lifespan. Interestingly, something I found in the research is fluid intelligence declines. So probably about 25 onwards. But you can slow the rate of decline through strength training. So go out and buy a kettlebell, and a pull-up bar, and just lift those every day. And it'd be great for you. It'll slow down that rate of decline. But I think so. EI or EQ on the other side of things, that increases across the lifespan. And so one of the theories about why that is that as you go through life, you experience more of the highs and lows of emotions that come with life events. So life throws stuff at you and you deal with it, and you learn from that. So we have something called emotional learning. So it's a bit like you were saying about the exercise that you did about looking at what your emotional triggers were, for example, and reflecting about that. So each of the emotions have universal themes that kind of trigger them, but we also have our own personal learned triggers, and we learn coping strategies and mechanisms to deal with emotions. So EQ does increase across lifespan. But one of the main things that differentiates IQ and EQ is IQ can't be trained. So all of those brain training apps and stuff that say that if you sit here and do Sudoku, you'll get smarter. It's nonsense. You just get better at doing Sudoku, or you just get better at brain training apps. It doesn't transfer, so it doesn't increase fluid intelligence. But EQ can be increased with training. And I think especially in kind of recruitment, with EI as an ability, for example, you've got sort of IQ tests and those verbal numerical reasoning tests that companies use. When you're recruiting, say, a financial planner or a financial advisor, it's relatively pointless because everyone's got financial planning exams. Some have got chartered, or some have got exams above that, like CFP. So IQ's already been the playing field's been leveled by the fact that the entry bar is already high, because so financial advisors, planners, you're already smart enough because you have to have been smart enough to pass the exams. So actually IQ doesn't matter as much in terms of job performance within the financial planning profession, whereas EQ does, because you can be the best qualified advisor out there, but if you can't empathize, you can't communicate, you can't regulate and manage your own emotions and stress that comes with the demands of the role, you're not going to be as successful as someone who can do all those things.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. So you've done a lot of research, haven't you? Yeah.
Yeah. But I would say I'm still scratching the surface with it, because it's a huge topic.
Okay. Can you just sort of share some of the research and what it says about EI and job performance in financial planning?
Yeah, and so when I did my dissertation, part of that is you do a literature review, so you have to look at what does the research say about EI and job performance generally, and EI predicts job performance, and that's kind of a blanket statement across many job roles. But when you kind of narrow it down and you look at, well, which job roles does it have more of an impact on? It's really those job roles, which means that you deal with emotion as part of the job role. Day in, day out, if emotion is part of the role, like financial services, then EI actually matters even more than it does for, say, another job where it's you're not dealing with emotions, day in, day out. So the research is pretty conclusive to say that if you deal with emotion as part of the job role, EI massively helps and predicts job performance. Some interesting things that I found. There was a study looking at as you increase job complexity. This was done in the 90s. As you look at increasing job complexity, how does sales performance, individual sales performance, vary from bottom performer to top performer within firms? And they actually found that there was something like 120 times difference in financial advisors. So there's this huge gap between, say, top and bottom performers. And they placed financial advice at the top of the tree in terms of the most complex job that was out there.
Oh.
And they looked at multiple different job roles for this. And I found that interesting because I just thought, actually, you kind of underestimate actually how demanding the job role is. Because you've got especially if you throw in running a business to that as well. So it's an incredibly demanding and complex job role. So I think the EI and job performance generally says EI predicts performance. If we look specifically at the financial advisor role, there have been some studies, including my own research, which were actually specifically looked at financial planning. There was one study which correlated it with sales performance. So they looked at over 700 advisors. This was in the US, and looked at their sales performance, and they put them through an EI test and correlated that with their sales, and actually found that as you increase EI scores, sales performance goes up. There's another study which looked at client retention, client referrals, and found that both of those go up as EI scores increase. And then my own research, I effectively found a similar result. So looking at client retention and EI, it was a small sample, but yeah, there was a statistically significant relationship between client retention and EI scores for the advisors. But one other thing I kind of stumbled across in the literature was I think a lot of listeners will be familiar with the sort of the Vanguard research about Advisor Alpha. That there's this 1 or 2% per annum on offer that advisors can deliver through behavioural coaching. And I think the authors in that paper, they said, well, behavioural coaching is, in order to do this, an advisor can act as like an emotional circuit breaker, helping their clients kind of navigate the emotions of financial decisions. But also, they stated, I'm paraphrasing here, but they stated that advisors need to be able to perceive and preempt clients' emotional triggers. And so, if you think back what I was explaining about the different quadrants of EI, what the authors of the Vanguard paper around how you deliver behavioral coaching are saying is effectively advisors need EI in order to be effective behavioral coaches. That's what stood out from that to me. And I think there was another good study, which I think was really, really key in terms of my sort of development and thinking about the need for bringing EI training into financial services, was that it has been done before. About 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, American Express ran an EI development program in the US for their financial advisors. And they did this over 4 years. And so they effectively, what they did was they got a cohort of financial advisors each year for 4 years. They put them through an emotional intelligence test. They put them through a 1-day workshop where they were being taught really self-management skills and reframing, cognitive reappraisal. Some of the reflective things that you were talking about, they were taught those types of interventions. They also did a number of different things. So they measured sales performance. They measured trait anger, which is like a questionnaire. You can look at how frequently you're triggered by anger, for example. They did another one on perceived stress, health outcomes. And then they ran this program for a year. So after the workshop, each advisor got an individual development plan, which looked at what areas specific to them that they needed to apply learning to change their behavior. And then they had 4 coaching calls throughout the following 12 months. And they were getting, on average, and this is over the kind of control group, which was other advisors in the company, an average of 25% uplift in sales from this development program. So I think the range was about 18%, the lowest cohort, to 46% in the largest cohort. So I found that just exciting, because I thought, well, that was done 20 years ago. And when I was doing the research, when I had that light bulb moment of like, well, it's so obvious that this is how advisors should be trained in terms of that soft skills, that sits along technical skills. I'm not a big fan of soft skills, by the way, because I think there's nothing soft about dealing with a grieving client. It's hard, or those difficult conversations are challenging. So I'm not a fan of the term soft skills. But it had been done, and I just thought, well, someone else is going to be running this training program, has got to be doing this. And the answer was no. So I just thought, well, there's a gap that I can fill.
I love that. Soft skills, right? It's a word that gets thrown around to describe it. What would you use instead?
I think hard intelligence is probably a better term. So EI is a hard intelligence. It's not a soft skill.
Okay.
It's not a nice to have. It helps you deal with the difficult things, stress, grievances, and it's not just dealing with clients. It could be, you run a business, you have to do performance reviews for, you have to recruit people. I think EI in recruitment is really important as well. I think because it's an ability. When you're assessing candidates, for example, qualifications are helpful, but they're not going to tell you if people have got those skills to empathize, communicate effectively. Verbal numerical reasoning doesn't work because everyone's smart enough anyway.
Yeah.
Personality tests, companies use those quite a lot. So like the Hogan's or DISC, things like that.
Yeah.
They're all self-report measures on the whole, which basically means that if you're the candidate, you get to decide what the answers are to the question. So you can just answer it in a way that you think is going to get you the job. So you can go, yeah, of course I'm hardworking, of course I'm creative. Whereas an EI test that's ability-based, you can't cheat that. You either have the ability or you don't. But actually, testing provides a really good baseline for training, because it sort of says, well, look, here's where you are, here's your strengths and weaknesses. Let's convert that into an individual development plan, and let's turn that into, let's maybe put in some coaching calls, and actually look at how do you change.
James, I'm really interested in the recruitment side. Obviously, I've just come into Hoxton. I've got a background in recruitment, and we're always looking for new ways to attract the right talent into the business and fit the right talent into the business. But the conversation you're having, the points you're raising about the research and the impact it has on the bottom line when you start to actually train and measure emotional intelligence, I think it makes total sense to do that at the beginning of the journey in the recruitment process. Could you just share with us some ideas around what companies can do right now to start measuring this emotional intelligence or checking it in the recruitment process?
Yeah, so I think one of the services that I offer is emotional intelligence assessment.
Yep.
So let's say the company had 5 candidates that they'd shortlisted, and they just thought, well, actually these 5 are brilliant. They're past, whatever interview stages there are. We're really struggling to narrow it down. We could put them through an emotional intelligence assessment, and then I could sit down with the hiring managers, look at the scores and reports, and give them some feedback around, what strengths and weaknesses of each candidate to help them make a bit of a better decision.
Is it something that has to be done with a person in the process, or can this be done through video? Can it be done through recording stuff? Is AI starting to catch up with, or machine learning? Is that starting to catch up with this whole concept of emotional intelligence and recruitment?
I think, so I'm just trying to understand the question there. Is this on the interpretation of score, or is it on the assessment side?
I'm interested in measuring emotional intelligence. Yeah. We talked about recruitment, and that actually in the recruitment process, measuring emotional intelligence is better than things like personality tests, etc. Yeah. How do I do that? I want to do that today. I want to do it today, right? Now, would I have to have someone like yourself in the process who's like an emotional intelligence expert and you're involved in it, or is there a program or a test that can be done? How do we measure emotional intelligence in the recruitment process?
Got it. Okay, so the measurement tool, it doesn't necessarily need need me to administer a test, for example. The emotion intelligence measurement tool that I use was developed by the Emotion Intelligence Academy, who I mentioned I work quite closely, and the tool works on the basis of the score is added up between three different elements of the assessment. So participants go through the assessment. They'll do a self-report initially. So the first section they'll go through is looking at self-report questions about emotions. They'll then invite people to do a 360 analysis. So they'll maybe select 2 or 3 people who will rate them on those questions, and then they'll also complete a knowledge-based, ability-based test, which includes things like situational judgment tests of how would you react to this type of situation. And the reason that you need all 3 of those is because, what I've mentioned before about personalities, that if you just give people self-report, potential or bias that they'll just answer it in a way that they think is favourable.
Yeah.
So self-report requires honesty, and there is this, and also it requires people to have really, really razor-sharp perception of their own, of where they are and their own strengths and weaknesses, and we don't all have that. The 360 does what that does is it does, well, okay, you've rated yourself this way. How do others perceive you? And that's really important for EI, because again, it's not just about you, it's about how you interact with others. So you might answer it and say, I'm really good at managing anger or managing stress. And other people might say, well, no, you're not. But so you get this kind of difference in scores between self and other. But really the big one is how do you score on the ability test? Because if you say you're good, you have to perform at the same level. Otherwise, it knocks your score down. So you have to be self-aware of your abilities and have that match up with the ability test. So the assessment triangulates all 3 of those to give you an EI score. And then the interpretation of those scores, there's no reason that firms couldn't interpret the reports themselves. But sometimes it helps to have an expert to say, well, actually, here's what the report says. And if the decision is, but it's a big decision for a role that's high stakes enough that you need to get it right. Maybe you want to bring in an expert just to compare the 2 reports and give their opinion, and just think, well, actually, what this candidate has got these strengths and weaknesses, this candidate has those strengths and weaknesses.
If for example you wanted to train emotional intelligence, like train a trainer, so you said about getting an expert in, is that something companies could actually do? Could they do like a course on it and then have like an emotional intelligence expert within the HR and talent attraction team, for example?
So one of the things that I've been working on is developing an emotional intelligence training program. So I've got a website that should be live over the next couple of months, and I've got some time in the studio in 2 weeks' time to record the knowledge element of that training program. So once the website's launched over the next couple of months, there'll be a learning management system and portal where people can go in and access the course that gives them the knowledge and understanding to develop the skills in EI and then apply that to their job. What we're looking at doing long term with that is absolutely doing that, is instead of me delivering it or people going in and buying it online, is for larger companies who say, well, we want someone in-house as an expert. That's one of the things that's on the to-do list long term, is to have a train the trainer program where we come in and we take someone through the train the trainer program so that they can access the assessment tools, they can interpret the reports, they can coach, mentor in-house. So that's absolutely something that's on the agenda.
Very interesting. I really like the sound of that one. Definitely keep me in the loop with that, James, because I think this is brilliant. I think this is definitely something that at Hoxton we want to get stuck into. Also, I've got the academy. I think it's a brilliant thing to try to adopt and adapt into the academy as well. And I think most companies who are onboarding new advisors will want to know about this and want to start implementing it, because recruitment's a bit crap in financial planning. And when you're saying like one of the most, you go back to your kind of list of different job types, and financial planning being the most trickiest one at the top, and the most requirement for emotional intelligence. And I think the more we bring AI in and tools in that are going to take away some of the jobs that take us away from being in front of clients, in front of people, the more there's going to be a need for us to be more emotionally intelligent. And I think having a high level of emotional intelligence is going to make you more marketable in the future as a financial planner or as an employee, as a person in general, because I think what's going to be happening with the future, all the mundane jobs will start to be taken away. And what it's going to do is push us more closer together as human beings. And we're either going to get on or we're going to hate each other and tear each other apart. So it's the person who's got that high level of emotional intelligence is going to win, right? Because not only are they capable of managing their own emotions, but they're capable of also managing other people's and recognizing it as well. So it becomes a huge skill, doesn't it? It becomes this amazingly like sort of, the more I work on my emotional intelligence, the further I've gone in my career. It's just as simple as that. It's had such a positive impact on me. So what's interesting for me is I don't know how to measure it, apart from a byproduct of it is that my life's getting better, that I'm happier, that I get on with people better, that my job enjoyment is higher, that I'm being paid more, I'm doing more interesting work, and I've got more responsibility, and I can cope with it better. These are great measurements, but I would love to. Can you actually, like, let's say you get 100 people in a room, right? Could you literally grade from top to bottom who's the most intelligent emotionally?
If you did an assessment, yeah.
So you could come into my business with 300 people in it, and you could literally create a league table of who's got the highest level of emotional intelligence and who hasn't, and then we can look at that and go, right, these people need to work on their emotional intelligence.
So this is one of the conclusions that I made when I did my dissertation, is that so it's a bit. So I've got to tell you something else before I can answer this. So one of the things with so do you remember I said there was about 120 times difference between top and bottom performance in that study when looking at advisor performance? Because advisor performance, whenever, and I'm just assuming that advisors have got uncapped earnings. That's the assumption I'm making here. So if you've got a firm that's got, say, 300 advisors, let's assume those advisors have got uncapped earnings, they're self-employed, or they're fee earners. What happens is your distribution of performance isn't a bell curve, like height, for example. And the bell curve is that, right? So heights, everyone's 5 foot, not, the average for men is like 5'9". And then you've got some people who are like really, really tall as you go that way. And you've got some people who, short, you go that way. But everyone's kind of like within, kind of an average height. And for sales, for companies where you've got, say, sales, some people who sell things, and they produce things and they earn fees, it is not that shape. It's this shape, flat, massively up. So what that basically means is that at the top end here, you've got effectively a small number of people. It's the square root of the number of people in the organization, but there's a small number of people who do a hugely disproportionate amount of the total production. And then you've got, just below that, you've got people who have got the potential to become those people. So they're on the upward a bit of that curve. And then you've got people down here sort of on the flat bit. And this is being pretty ruthless, but if I was running a company with 300 advisors in it, I'd spend all of my training budget on the people that have got the potential to move further up the curve, because that's where you're going to see the biggest increase in company productivity. So you could do an assessment of 300 people. You could let the people who are already killing it, leave them alone. Like, they're successful. Don't mess with that. Like, you know who they are. Leave them to it. They've worked out how to do it. It's the 20% maybe below that. That's where you want to spend, maybe about 80% of your training budget.
And the testing that's in place that you can also offer that you're working on is a way to identify that percentage of people that really need this extra support, training, and development around EQ.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool.
Because it could be that, let's say you've got someone in there who's just needs a bit of help with recognizing emotions in others, or they need a bit of help with self-management. You give them that knowledge, you train the skills, you drop in a bit of coaching to make sure that they take the knowledge and apply it at work to change the behavior.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they might go from say a top 25% to a top 5 or 10%.
Do we have any idea around timescales of implementation of starting to work on your emotional intelligence or EQ to productivity going up?
So if you look at the American Express figures I gave you, that was a 12-month program.
12 months. Okay.
So what I've done with the development program that I've worked on is it starts with an assessment, and then you go through if we're running it face to face, it's a three-day workshop.
Yeah.
To give people on the knowledge. But then with American Express, the learning came from having 4 quarterly coaching calls to apply the learning. So having the knowledge and just attending the workshop or doing reading is one thing. But it's not going to lead to performance unless it leads to behavior change,
which is the accountability part, the checking in.
Personal development plans, identifying actions for improvement, then actually following through and doing the work that leads to behavior change. Because if you don't do anything differently, don't expect an increase in performance.
Yeah.
So American Express, they did that within 12 months.
So how many check-ins did they have? Sorry, 4.
Yeah. 4 over
right.
a year. Yeah.
And then there was so with those check-ins, though, what were they checking in on specifically?
I don't think the detail was in the paper, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were looking at the PDP plans that they set up, so those individual personal development plans, and they were looking at how people would make progression against those development plans.
Yeah.
So it's the type of thing that you would do normally as a performance coach.
Yeah.
You would tick off things that have gone well, and boost confidence, via highlighting successes. You would discuss and identify areas for improvement, and you would constantly be updating and redoing that PDP plan.
So the most impactful way to start looking at EQ within a financial planning business, right? Can I make an assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong or add some more meat to the bones? Would it be looking at the recruitment process at the very, very beginning? And would it be looking at what your current, let's say your current financial planner's EQ actually is in identifying the area where you can make the biggest improvement? Would they be the 2 areas that you would implement EQ into a financial planning business that wants to grow?
So I think, I think assessment is a good starting point.
Yeah.
And then once you've done the assessment, you can look at what training needs are there. And then you could effectively deliver the knowledge-based workshops, which gives people the knowledge. And then really you can then identify what individual support's needed for people that go through the program. And because EQ it varies. Some people are naturally very, very high scorers. So you don't really need to invest as much in development behavior change with the high natural, people who are scoring high naturally, than you would do with, say, people who need a bit of help increasing their score. And I would say one of the things that I think will be on the online course when that's available is, so we'll test at the beginning, we'll teach, and then at the end of the learning program, you get an option to, I think, unlock the other, I think, a couple of parts of the assessment. And if your EI score is above a certain benchmark, you get a certificate in applied emotional intelligence for financial planners. So I want that to be a qualification that people can take out and take to companies and say, I have an EQ score of 140 plus, because that might just give them the edge when they're applying for a job.
How long would that then take to get that qualification?
So effectively, it depends how long it takes them to go through the workshop in their own time, but it's probably going to be about 8 hours, I think, of recorded material. So they
Okay,
work
so
through
it's
that
not
on their
like
own time.
it's not like
So
some kind of year-long course or anything like that. It can
no,
be done pretty quickly, and
yeah,
actually, it becomes quite interesting, especially on that new entrant level as well. So a new, like for example, look at my academy, right? I'm pull people into
yeah,
it who are currently working in different professions at the moment. They come into my academy, they start doing their CII qualifications, and they start learning some of the other skills required to be a financial planner, and they connect with the community. But actually, if they also do this within it, that's really powerful, because when they end up going out to market themselves to companies to take them on, they can say, oh, look, I've done the financial planner life EQ test.
yeah.
So I really love the idea. I love the sound of that. I think it's amazing. I think that should definitely be in academies and in general, and companies that are hiring people. I think also as well, it comes in really handy as well for, let's say somebody's coming into that company that maybe is coming straight from university, that might not have had that length of time in life to build EQ as quickly or as through experience, right? So that's a really great. God, why don't they teach this stuff in school? Do you know what? Like, I would love to learn all of this in school. Like this, because it's like when I did the 12 steps, I was like, why the hell did they not just teach this in school? Because it would have made like. I try to teach my daughter, and I get it. She's young, and I'm gradually teaching her things around resentments and fears and our emotions, and we talk and we listen and we open up. But it's like none of that shit was taught to me in school, and I was desperately somebody who needed it. I needed that emotional intelligence, because I was so energetic and such a thinker and such a it was distractible and all of those things, and I was energetic, and I needed to be able to understand my mind, and also I grew up in a bit of a crazy environment, so you just kind of get stuck into school and they shut you down the book learning style, don't they? And they think, do that as opposed to actually be a good human being and understand like how others think and how you think, like, and that's going to actually add huge amounts more value in your life than just sticking your head in a book. It's my personal opinion, right? Ever since I've hyper focused on emotional intelligence, mindfulness, my life is vastly improved. And I'm not the most academic of people, so if I can do it, others can definitely do this and improve their lives as well.
It's a skill. I mean, when I was going through the kind of the MSc and learning about emotions and triggers, and it was during that time that COVID hit, and we all had to go in and get our vaccines. And up until that point, I'd had like a lifelong needle phobia. But I can pinpoint, to use a pun.
Yeah.
The point in my childhood, I think, when I was pinned down in a doctor's surgery to be given a vaccine.
Yeah.
From that point onwards, I just had this huge fear of dentists, just really injections, blood tests. I was like, the blood would drain out my face. I'd feel sick. And, that real kind of like intense phobia response. But actually, it's emotional. That is what emotional learning is that you get a scenario, you get intense emotions, and effectively you get this kind of, it's like a conditioned stimulus. Is that the minute you see a needle, the fear program runs.
As a kid.
It's like it's in the drive, it's running.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh God. But learning mindfulness, learning how emotions worked, appreciating that they were reactions and that they just appear in consciousness, and that you can observe them, and that then you can appraise them and then react and decide whether you want to let them rule you or you rule them. I'm not scared of it anymore. Like, I walked into that first vaccine, sat in the waiting room, shut my eyes for 10 minutes, went in, no fear response. So this is what I mean, is that it's and I only learned how to do that by being taught the skills to be able to master that.
Yeah.
Have control of it rather than it have control of me.
Yeah, I went through a similar scenario. You used to show me a needle and I would literally pass out. I remember as a kid in the doctor's surgery, and he was like, yeah, I'm going to have to give him an injection. I was like, I'm just going to go to the toilet a minute. And I remember I locked myself in the doctor's toilet. My mum was like, can you come out? And I was like, there's no way in the world I'm coming out if he's going to stick a needle in me. And that was from being a kid and having this booster injection when I was going to Africa. And it was horrendous. But as life's gone on and I've kind of adapted, I've got a real tolerance now, actually, for that type of thing. I was in Dubai, actually, and I had a bloody neat infection in my finger, and they had to tear my nail off and like drain it all. It was, and I was just like, yeah, go for it. And I knew that it was going to be horrible and painful, but I knew also wasn't going to be forever. And it's more painful to keep that infection there, and I could lose my finger and all that sort of stuff. So you kind of rationalize things a lot more as you get older, and you emotionally kind of regulate, don't you?
Yeah.
I wasn't in that childlike emotion that I was feeling when I was 6 years old, locking myself in that toilet anymore. So it's really, really good. Let's just get on to the bit, like, before we kind of end this podcast episode, I could talk to you all day, but okay, so let's just look at the impact that this could have on financial planners then, yeah? So we looked at it from the recruitment perspective, but what about financial planners in their day jobs? How is it going to improve their lives if they work on EQ?
I think two elements really is, let's just talk about stress, because that's that follows on nicely for what we've just been talking about. It's a demanding role, it's a stressful role, and I think exactly what we've just been talking about, recognizing and managing that, it translates into job performance. So that's that self-awareness and self-management element. And ultimately, that's the kind of, that's what American Express focused on. They were giving people interventions to understand emotions in themselves, and sort of do that reappraisal element. But so there's that element, is understanding yourself makes you more aware of how you look after yourself. And the minute that you kind of focus on that, you get the right habits in place. You start. If you are stressed, for example, you just think, well, actually, maybe I need to, hypothesize what is it that's going on, what can I do about it? Do I need to take a break? Do I need to, go for a walk, at lunchtime? Whatever it is. But if you get sort of better at sort of tuning in with yourself and coming up with the tools for managing it, you can translate that into job performance. But I'd say the big payoff is understanding others, because that's a massive part of the financial planner role, is building rapport with clients early, because that's key for them opening up and sharing information with you. It's going to help you do a great job for them. Running that kind of discussion about hopes, fears, goals, wants, having that discussion and communicating with clients about their plans. In that financial planning context, you need to understand and recognize and respond to emotions there to build trust. And then dealing with the difficult conversations that come. So client comes to you and then annoyed about performance, negotiating fees. If you run a business, negotiating, buying another business, negotiating, selling your business eventually. Building and managing a team as well. If you then become a leader, of a business, you need EI to recruit people and attract them so that they follow you. And that's one of the things that this was in, I think, the research that I did as well, is that one thing that sort of separates entrepreneurs and managers is that entrepreneurs are really, really good at recognizing their weaknesses and hiring people that have got strengths, that complement, and actually inspiring people to kind of follow them. But you don't do that by being a micromanager or being dismissive of your colleagues' emotions. So if you're on this journey of you've got a financial, you want to be a financial planner who's going to eventually run their own business, EI is going to help you from beginning to end.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah, I love it. I'm definitely going to continue our conversation anyway and explore this further, because 100% this needs to be implemented at Hoxton. I think it would add so much value. And because we're such a young company, we've been going for 6 years, and we got young people in it. I think, being able to implement this early doors in the recruitment process from the very, very beginning and all the way through, I think is going to be powerful. I think it also just so you've got the recruitment side, but then once you've gone through the recruitment side, you're then moving in then to the training side. And that's where it goes. It goes in recruitment into training, and then it goes into on the job. So that to measure that emotional intelligence and to train it and develop it throughout the career of an individual that works within your business and to monitor it, I think is powerful. And if you can track it and you can monitor it and you can look back over 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, the impact that that's actually had, that is exciting. That to me is really exciting.
Especially if you run those sort of trainer programs as well, because so for example, like when I was employed, we used to have once a month, your manager would come and sit in a meeting room with you and they'd observe your meeting, with your client, and they'd make some notes. But if you've got someone in the room who was a trained emotional intelligence trainer, who's going to learn the skills of perceiving and recognizing emotions, they're going to have a different, like a third eye in the meeting. And that's immensely useful for feeding back to the advisor about areas for development. Because it might be like, look, did you see that client had a slight microfacial expression of fear when you mentioned their investment performance? If the advisor's like, no, I missed that. They're like, okay, you need to follow up and maybe have a conversation at another date about how your client is feeling about their portfolio at the moment. And all of this is about massively enhancing the client experience. So I think actually having someone sat in a meeting room who's trained to observe and pick up on these things as well is massively key.
But do we have like emotions? We got AI, right? We got machine learning. So the ability for me to sit down with you, right, and we're talking to each other. Machine learning would be able to observe our body language, our language, what we say, how we respond, and then create a measurement and a score at the end of emotional intelligence. Are we there yet? Have we got anything like that you're aware of that's out there? Because that's powerful. Because the more we're actually also on, because from a compliance perspective as well, I reckon like if you were measuring like how you're interacting with the client, are you saying the right things? Are you recognizing vulnerabilities in clients as well? Because that's a big thing. Yeah, recognizing vulnerable clients. But then to actually use it as a training tool around emotional intelligence is powerful as well. And if I was on a call, let's say I'm doing 10 video calls a week, right? Now, at the beginning of that week, mine was a score of 56 on emotional intelligence, and it actually measured it and gave me back some feedback. And I would then try and improve my score on the next go, and then the next go. And then over that week, I can actually measure my score going up. But it's all done through machine learning. And are we there yet? Is that futuristic, or is that actually happening, or what?
I'm just thinking of a way to answer this that doesn't take half an hour, because that's quite a big question, that one.
Is it? Right. Well, summarize it.
So there's the reason that it's quite a big topic is when what we teach on the emotional intelligence program is that there's 6 channels of that we can use to communicate. So there's the face, so facial expressions, there's the voice, which is pitch, pitch, tone, volume. There's our body language.
Yeah.
There's our verbal content. There's our verbal style, which is how we're interacting. And then there's our psychophysiology. So psychophysiology is things like how each emotions also affect our physiology. So if you think about stress response, I mentioned that draining from the face, with the sort of needle phobia. If you were sat in the room with me, watching me have that, you would see my face get paler. So I'll give you an example. For a machine to be able to do that, you would have to have a thermal camera in the room that would need to measure pupil dilation, breathing rate. It would need thermal imaging to see where blood flow is going. Because actually, as an observer, you can pick up on these things. Like, say, for example, if I'm talking to you and all of a sudden your ears change colour and go red, I might think, well, hang on a minute, why's your blood pressure gone up? Because your blood pressure, you've got small capillaries in your ears. So if your blood pressure goes up, the blood's forced to the surface and your ears will change colour. So if I can perceive that and pick up on that, and maybe there's a few other markers across those other channels, I might think, well, actually, are you experiencing something here? So you have to gather data from all those 6 channels, know how to read them, and know how to interpret them. And don't forget that it's not going to make a diagnosis and say this person's experiencing this. It's a hypothesis. And the only way that you're going to test that hypothesis is by interacting with the individual opposite you. And just basically been saying, like I said, Sam, I noticed you seem a bit bit unsettled. I'm not saying your ears are changed colour. You might be settled. Is everything okay? Is there something about this conversation that's not sitting right with you? And that might just prompt you to go, actually, I wasn't going to say it, but this has been on my mind.
Okay.
And that's what I mean about this perceive, and then it enhances the interaction, and maybe you get a bit more information that enhances them and strengthens the relationship.
The good news is you've got a book coming out soon in October. What's the name of the book?
Working title at the moment is The Heart of Finance.
Excellent.
Emotional intelligence for financial planners.
Fantastic. And just give us a brief overview of what that will actually cover.
Yeah, so I've co-authored that with Cliff Lansley from the Emotional Intelligence Academy, who's got a PhD in EI. And so what we've done is we've come together and we've blended kind of practitioner and academic experience. And the book has been written in a way that we get foundations and definitions out of the way. So we give people sort of technical bits they need to understand. And then we look at the client journey. So what do you do in preparing for meetings from the EI perspective, in that first meeting, in a planning meeting, if you're having sort of a goals-based financial planning discussion, presenting your solutions. It talks about vulnerable clients in there as well. And then ongoing service. So how do you build EI into your ongoing service strategy? And I think that's one of the things which I think could be a real growth area. You mentioned about AI, machine learning. I think the bit that the machine can't do yet is that human interaction element. But what I think is really exciting is us getting into this world where you've got a highly emotionally intelligent advisor who comes out of a meeting with a deep level of understanding about their client's fears, triggers, hopes, wants, dreams. They put that in their CRM system, which has got AI linked to it. That AI pops up and just goes, okay, markets have moved or legislation's changed. These are your top clients in terms of most likely to be anxious about what's happening.
Oh,
Pick
wow.
the phone up to them and just reassure them. Because now you're using your CRM and as part of your business process to create an emotionally intelligent business. And so that I think is really cool.
Yeah. Wow. An actually emotional, intelligent business.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah,
I think CRM could deliver that.
Is that like in place now?
I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't do it. You could just categorize clients in terms of. I mean, the way that I wrote this in the book was I was like, look, the things you want to be pay real attention to is anxious clients, and at the end of that, impulsive clients. So impulsive clients are going to be the ones that come to you and just say, well, I've got this idea. What should I do with it? And just go, like, okay, calm down.
So is this based on like our interpretation of the client, or is there a way to implement it into the fact find that actually picks that up?
It's our interpretation of the client, but I mean, the part of what you would do is that you could build into your, say, client fact find, or however you have, say, a risk discussion or the questions that you ask about, as goals, part of a goals-based, planning discussion. You could build into that a discussion about emotions, triggers, what the client's own personal triggers are, or it might be around money, and collect that and just say, well, look, if I'm building a bespoke communication strategy for you, what would that look like? Do you want long reports from me? Do you want bullet points? Do you want videos? Do you want infographics? So that you're thinking about, well, actually, am I presenting information in a way that the client wants to receive as well? And then you can build into the service strategy how frequently and what type of communication the person's going to want to have from you.
Very interesting.
And it's back to that piece I said about, well, Vanguard said about, to be an effective behavioral coach, you've got to anticipate clients' triggers, and you've got to anticipate the things that might make the client stray from the course, that financial plan that you've laid out for them. So it's not just about doing that once a year. You've got to think, well, actually, throughout the year, what could come up throughout the year that is going to impact clients' ability to stick in the plan.
Also, when you said there about the way that they interpret information, right? That's so cool, because if you understand their preference and how best to respond based on their emotions, with AI and automation, there is nothing to say that when the announcement or bulletin comes out, right, that it's written in a script, that can't automatically go into a video of me where it changes my mouth, and the script then uses my tone of voice and creates a video straight away. So if somebody prefers, someone's kind of, oh no, they're going to probably be a bit flappy at the moment because the markets are changing, but they love to see me face to face because it gives them reassurance and comfort. Then it will trigger a video, bang, from the bulletin to the video to being in their mobile phone on a WhatsApp saying, hey, it's Sam, don't worry about the markets. You might have read today that this is happening and da-da-da-da. But the other person might want an email drop in their lap, or they might want a text, or they might want to be direct, That's like insane when you start kind of connecting how that would actually work based on the emotional profiling of your clients. That's amazing. Like that's another level, isn't it, really?
Well, I think that's the future, isn't it? So, robo advice, AI is going to get better. And I think so. I think there's one hypothesis that actually financial advice businesses of the future, they deal with fewer clients, but they have a far better understanding of them, and they deliver, far more for fewer.
Yeah, I like it. You've definitely found a bit of a niche here, haven't you? Is there many people in the UK doing this like what you're doing, or is it mainly US or?
I don't know. I think there are very few people that are looking at combining emotional intelligence with financial planning and actually looking at developing training programs that are designed to lead to performance increases.
Have you linked in with Timeline?
No.
You should definitely link in with Timeline. Like reach out to them and explain it. Like I don't mind. I know the Hannah in marketing. Yeah. Abraham, I've seen obviously his presentations are always very good. But from a behavioural perspective, this ties in beautifully, and they're so forward thinking that I think they would lap it up, mate.
Yeah, well, I think the behavioural element. There's a lot of good high quality content out there about behavioural finance. And advisors I speak to generally about behavioural finance tend to say the same thing, which is it's really interesting. I love reading about it. I'm fascinated about how cognitive psychology affects, may affect how my clients make decisions. I'm not 100% sure about what I do with that. And that's where I think EI fills that gap, is that EI is about is about giving you the skills to be in a meeting and read and respond live. And I think that's got far more utility, I think. But it's
kind of like behavior evidence.
Analysis.
Behavior evidence and EQ all kind of...
It ties together, yeah.
Ties together beautifully, doesn't it? Oh, I really love it, mate. Oh, I love it. Oh, I'm really pleased you come on the podcast. That's really got my brain thinking.
I really enjoyed it. I mean, I could keep going.
Yeah, I know. But it's got my brain thinking, It's got me whirling away, and I'm so pleased I'm in financial planning now, working within financial planning, and I'm in quite a luxury really in the job that I'm in, is that I can influence things.
Yeah.
And I got a background in recruitment as well. And obviously I understand financial planning, I understand financial planners, and I can come in with a bit more of a creative sort of style, if you like, and look at ways that we can improve things. And I think when people have been in the world of financial planning for so long, it's often difficult to change your perception or your thinking about doing things. And I just feel like this is like really cool. So I definitely want to know more. And I definitely want to kind of, what I would love from you, right, is same as probably anybody else listening to this podcast, is like, where can I find more information about this? Where can I, where is there like a roadmap to what can be done so I can implement this in our business in the right way? How do we work with you? Over to you.
Well, I think I've got a new website's going to be launched over the next couple of months. And when that's launched, there should be the online course that people can go and do themselves.
Yeah,
so that's going to be for individuals who want to engage with the learning. They can go and do that and work through it in their own time. Next year, I've still got to work out when to do this. Is that I want to run a series of kind of face-to-face workshops, because I think the face-to-face learning environment is brilliant. But I just need to kind of sort calendar out when I'm going to do that. So we've got our second baby on the way in September. So end of the years, we're going to have 2 under 2 in the house. It's going to be mad, but I'm really looking forward to it. So next year I want to get back to get some live workshops in the diary. That again, this will be for individuals. They'll book on, and we'll run a cohort of probably 12 to 25 ish. But for businesses that want to do something in house, let's have a conversation. Well, I think actually anyone who wants to have a chat about it, my diary's open, and let's talk. So
I think we've got our own CRM at Hoxton. It's really good. Like, it's all built in house, and we've also got our own app as well for clients, which is all interlinked. It's really like, they're so tech focused. It's ridiculous. I've got about 25 people in the tech team. I might be interested in you actually speaking to the tech developer and sort of talking about this CRM integration and your ideas around CRM integration. I think that would be quite a cool conversation to have anyway. I think it would be interesting, and it might spark some real interest. So I think I'll try and sort that out for you, and see what you think as well. And obviously the benefit that I think benefit you have is that you've come from financial planning, right? You're not, and that's not to say that someone who's come outside of the profession can't add value, but I think that your lived experience of it is hugely beneficial, and also you run a business, so you can kind of relate. So that's good. Amazing. Listen, appreciate your time today. I've just had to cancel a meeting because I'm just more interested in talking to you. Whoopsie daisy. So thank you so much for your time. I found that really, really interesting. It's given me so many ideas, and it's just sent me off on a bit of a tangent in my mind. So really, really appreciate that. Send me a load of hyperlinks to things that I can look into and research, and I'll put that on the show notes as well, or anything where people can find you and connect with you and stuff. So send me that across, and I'll make sure that goes on the show notes. But I also, for my own benefit, I'm really interested in getting stuck into this. It's really, really interesting. Yeah.
Well, LinkedIn is probably the one that I'm most active on. So it's easy to get hold of me on LinkedIn.
All right.
Let's say the emails, james@raiserei.co.uk. But I mean, you can get that from my LinkedIn profile.
Beautiful.
I mean, what I'll do is I'll email and send over some links to just things that I think are a good starting point for people who get interested in this. Maybe a couple of books as well that I think are worth a read. Yeah,
do it. Send me a link. Send me a note, and I'll put it into the show notes then, and I'll put your contact details in there as well. All right.
Yeah, perfect.
Nice one, James. Thank you so much for sharing your emotional intelligence journey.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Well.